In crypto, most ecosystems promise growth. Very few are smaller tokens are designed to survive. Most tokens are launched to be traded. Most DeFi systems are built to attract liquidity. Most narratives end when the market turns ugly. But every now and then, an ecosystem appears that is trying to build something deeper. Not just a token, not just a staking app, not just a stable coin, a full stack, a scarcity engine, a value accrual layer, a collateralized lending system, a stable coin, protocol to create stability mechanism, and an expansion model designed to grow beyond a single asset. That is what this episode is about. Cryptodetective presents ORX, AYRUN, USDx, Stablenet, TitanX, full stack. This ecosystem is already building one of the most structurally interesting Ethereum native DeFi stacks in the market today. I'm Lianya, and in this episode 16 on Crypto Detective CN, we break the entire machine down. This is not a meme review. This is not a 2-minute thread summary. This is a full structural breakdown. You can also read and study the complete research in the descriptions. We will start from Ethereum basics, move into TitanX, then into Ouroboros and ORX, then into USDx and the Stablenet lending design, then into the backstop pool, staking mechanics, AYRUN, systemic strengths, core risks, and finally, the path this ecosystem would need to take if it ever wants to grow into a major DeFi force. And yes, we will also address the key strategic question: why do the TitanX buy and burn reserves matter so much? While at the same time, it may actually be even more powerful if they are barely needed because the lending system itself becomes self-supporting. Let's begin at the base layer. At the highest level, Ouroboros and Stablenet are building an Ethereum-based DeFi stack around 4 main layers. First, TitanX as the base deflationary ecosystem asset. Second, ORX as the central value accrual and fee-sharing token in the Ouroboros layer. Third, USDx and Stablenet as the lending and stablecoin infrastructure that can potentially expand to additional collateral communities and deployments. Fourth, AYRUN, or AU, as a newer expansion-oriented token connected to deployment growth and buy and burn mechanics. The bull case here is not just price goes up because people get excited. It is much more structural than that. The real thesis is this: deflationary sync assets, protocol fee routing, collateralized stablecoin infrastructure, and expansion into additional ecosystems. But the risks are real too. This is still a younger and more niche DeFi stack. Execution risk, liquidity risk, oracle risk, peg stability risk, adoption risk, and smart contract risk all still matter. So a lot of it is at stake with the infamous builder Super Shadowly. This ecosystem is built on Ethereum, and its main tokens are ERC20 tokens. That matters because Ethereum provides the settlement layer, wallet compatibility, liquidity rails, and composability with other DeFi applications. In plain English, these assets are not living in some random shed behind the blockchain supermarket. They are built on the main boulevard of DeFi infrastructure. An ERC20 token is simply a standardized token format on Ethereum. Because TitanX, ORX, AYRUN, and USDx use Ethereum-compatible infrastructure, they can integrate much more easily with wallets, decentralized exchanges, liquidity pools, staking systems, and lending mechanisms than completely isolated or non-standard assets. This matters because good ecosystems do not only need tokenomics, they need rails, they need compatibility, they need composability. Ethereum gives this ecosystem a serious foundation. That does not magically guarantee success. But it does mean the stack is being built where real DeFi infrastructure already exists. TitanX presents itself as a scarcity-focused, community-owned, Ethereum-native DeFi asset built around fair launch mechanics, proof-of-burn-style tokenomics, and ecosystem-level buy and burn behavior. Its docs emphasize that protocols built in the TitanX ecosystem are meant to burn TitanX or otherwise strengthen the core asset through linked liquidity and ecosystem demand. In the screenshots used for this analysis, the TitanX app shows day 889. That matters because it supports the idea that TitanX is not a brand new microcap that just arrived yesterday wearing sunglasses indoors and calling itself revolutionary. It has been operating long enough to develop supply stats, staking systems, buy and burn infrastructure which is 16x bigger as the liquidity pool at this time. It is therefore a broader ecosystem narrative around building on TitanX. The key strategic role of TitanX is simple but important. It is the base ecosystem asset that is fully operational. Other protocols are designed to consume it, burn it, lock it, or pair with it, and it acts as the foundational scarcity engine for the broader stack. In other words, if this ecosystem becomes powerful, TitanX is not just part of the story. TitanX is the gravity field. One of the most important pillars of the TitanX model is the buy and burn structure. The supply statistics shown in the TitanX app indicate a heavily deflationary design, with more than half of the total supply already burned in the referenced snapshot. The stats page showed roughly 43.35% circulating and 56.65% burned, with the burned amount above 127 trillion TitanX and circulating supply above 97 trillion TitanX at the time captured. The TitanX ecosystem also includes buy and burn contracts. The buy and burn page shows a user-triggered framework where ETH can be used to perform buy and burn actions, and the interface displays cumulative TitanX bought and burned along with ETH used. The system also emphasizes MEV-protected routing for calls, which matters for security and execution quality. Why does this matter? Because buy and burn reduces liquid market supply over time. A shrinking float can and will hugely improve price responsiveness when the demand grows. And ecosystem apps that require TitanX, burn TitanX, or pair against TitanX create a reinforcing flywheel around the core token. This is the first major pillar of the thesis. The base layer is designed as a supply sink, not a dilution festival. That does not guarantee success, but structurally, it is very different from inflation-heavy farming ecosystems that leak value like a bucket with commitment issues. This is where the analysis becomes more interesting. The obvious interpretation is that buy and burn reserves matter because they create a direct sink for the base asset. They reduce circulating supply. They support the scarcity engine. They provide structural reinforcement. But there is a second, more subtle interpretation. In a truly healthy ecosystem, the reserves matter most as a backstop of strength, not necessarily as a mechanism that constantly needs to be used to rescue the system. In other words, the reserve is powerful partly because it exists. But the model may be even stronger if the protocol itself becomes so functional and self-supporting through lending, borrowing, fee generation, staking, redemptions, and collateral utility that users do not feel forced to sell in the first place. That is the deeper point. If users can borrow stable liquidity against assets instead of dumping them, if the ecosystem can produce utility without constant exit pressure, if the stablecoin model works through difficult conditions, then the need to sell may be reduced structurally. That does not mean nobody ever sells. Markets are markets. Humans are humans. Somebody always finds a reason to do something dramatic on a Tuesday. But the strategic ideal is clear. The strongest reserve is one that exists behind a system that increasingly supports itself. In that interpretation, the buy and burn reserve is not merely a weapon, it is also proof of structural depth. The Ouroboros Foundation describes itself as an interconnected series of smart contracts initially launched on Ethereum with ORX at the center. The docs explicitly explain that one of the goals is to consume TitanX via burning, locking, and depositing into liquidity pools, while also enriching the TitanX ecosystem with additional utility and routing value toward ORX through fee accrual rather than through purely inflationary rewards. So ORX is not framed as just another token. It is positioned as a central value accrual layer, a fee-sharing and reward hub, and a bridge from TitanX into a broader DeFi product suite, especially USDx and related systems. That distinction matters. TitanX is the scarcity core. ORX is the protocol economics core. If TitanX is the gravity field, ORX is the machine that tries to capture the economic activity orbiting inside it. Official ORX documentation describes ORX as the primary value accrual mechanism for the ecosystem. The token overview lists a maximum theoretical supply of 1,270,600,000 ORX, while also noting that effective circulating supply is actually lower as the ORX vesting periods are complete. The supply structure included launch emissions, initial liquidity, onboarding incentives, and optional incentive programs such as the backstop pool and USDx WETH farming. The launch mechanics are especially important. 95% of launch supply was allocated to TitanX deposits in the ORX minter. ETH contributions were a smaller route, with faster unlocks but less supply share. TitanX deposits vested over 52 weeks. ETH contributions dripped over 12 weeks. And deposited TitanX was retained for ORX buybacks. This created a meaningful design. TitanX was locked into the ORX minter. ORX distribution was tied to long-duration participation, and ORX is designed to receive value from product fees and ecosystem activity. This is one of the strongest conceptual parts of the full stack. ORX is a token that benefits when the ecosystem becomes economically useful, not merely noisy. In DeFi terms, that is the difference between a casino chip and a cash flow magnet. Structurally, the distinction matters. In weak ecosystems, tokens exist mainly to be distributed. In stronger ecosystems, tokens exist to capture value. That is what ORX is trying to do. The case for ORX is not simply that it exists in the same universe as TitanX. The case is that ORX sits at the center of a structure where protocol activity, fees, staking, lending, reward routing, and future ecosystem products may all concentrate value around it. If that happens successfully, ORX becomes more than a companion token. It becomes the economic heart of the Ouroboros layer. And that is one reason the system becomes interesting. TitanX handles scarcity, but ORX is handling the value capture. USDx is the stablecoin layer inside the Ouroboros and Stablenet ecosystem. The protocol describes it as a collateralized stablecoin borrowed against locked collateral such as TitanX, with support designed for additional assets and deployments over time. The Stablenet site describes the protocol as being designed for the long tail of crypto assets, with flexible integration, customizable safety parameters, and support for low-cap and mid-cap ecosystems. That is a major ambition, because what Stablenet is trying to build is not just a stablecoin for one token. It is trying to build infrastructure that can serve as a stablecoin deployment framework for multiple communities. If it works, that becomes very powerful, because a stablecoin system changes user behavior. Instead of selling an asset to extract liquidity, users can potentially borrow USDx against other tokens such as TitanX. And that is a completely different economic loop. The USDx lending model differs from the classic variable interest debt treadmill in several important ways. First, USDx is loaned into existence against collateral. Second, the system emphasizes a one-time borrowing fee rather than ongoing interest. Third, loan safety depends on collateral ratios, liquidation thresholds, and redemption mechanics. And fourth, the beginner docs emphasize maintaining collateral above the critical collateral ratio for maximum safety. This makes the system strong even in the past bear markets. The educational materials provide concrete example parameters for TitanX-backed loans. They reference a minimum collateral requirement around $2,500. They explain that users should monitor MCR and CCR. In the tutorial example for TitanX, MCR is explained as 120% and CCR as 150%. And in recovery mode, positions below the higher threshold can become eligible for liquidation. This matters because it creates a very different DeFi behavior pattern. If users can borrow stable liquidity against ecosystem assets without selling them, and do so through a system that is capital efficient and operationally attractive, then the ecosystem gains genuine utility instead of being limited to speculative rotation. That is the second major pillar of today's thesis. This is also where user education becomes essential. Systems like this are powerful, but lending contracts are not toys. A user must understand collateralization, liquidation thresholds, safety margins, and recovery mode. MCR, the minimum collateral ratio, is the line below which a position becomes too risky. CCR, the critical collateral ratio, affects broader system behavior and recovery conditions. In practical terms, the smartest borrower is not the one squeezing every possible dollar out of a position. The smartest borrower is the one preserving a hefty safety margin. Because the point of a collateralized lending system is not to play chicken with liquidation. The point is to unlock liquidity while keeping the position healthy. Good DeFi requires good mechanics, but it also requires disciplined users. Now we return to one of the most important ideas in this entire episode. A self-supporting lending protocol can change the psychology of an ecosystem. Why? Because the moment users can access liquidity without selling the underlying asset, the system starts competing directly with forced exit behavior. That matters especially during difficult markets. The stronger the lending utility becomes, the more the system can reduce structural reasons to sell. And when that lending system is paired with a stablecoin that survives market stress, the story gets even stronger. ORX Stablenet has already proven strong when many other stablecoins have perished in the recent bear market liquidations. That is why the resilience of USDx matters so much in the broader thesis. Not because it makes the ecosystem risk-free, Nothing in DeFi is risk-free. But because a stablecoin that continues functioning through TitanX bear market conditions supports the argument that the machine may actually work in practice, not just in diagrams, and trying to withhold optimistic Telegram messages. This brings us to one of the most misunderstood parts of the system, the backstop pool. The Ouroboros documentation describes a backstop pool where USDx can be staked to participate in liquidation handling. When under-collateralized positions are liquidated, the pool's USDx offsets debt and receives collateral in return. Participants may also earn ORX incentives if such rewards are active. The docs also describe a liquidator incentive of 200 USDx plus 0.5% of collateral for triggering eligible liquidations. Liquidation rewards are split according to pool share, and the system's peg is supported through both natural market incentives and redemption mechanics. This is why the backstop pool matters. It is not just an extra yield tab, it is part of the protocol's stability architecture. It is one of the mechanisms that turns the stablecoin system from a pretty interface into an actual risk-handling machine. In many DeFi systems, the moment stress appears, the illusion disappears. Here, the backstop pool is part of the design meant to absorb that stress. Now click to the part 2 of the research and get the conclusion of this study.